Hello, my name is Andrew Thake. I'm a divisional director with Resourcing Tomorrow. Delighted to be joined today by Estelle Levin-Nally, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Levin Sources.
Hi there, Andrew. It's really nice to see you, and thank you very much for having me as an interviewee for Resourcing Tomorrow.
Estelle, you've worked extensively on responsible sourcing with governments and industry leaders. In the context of the G7's Critical Minerals Action Plan, which you've been closely involved in, what policy shifts or private sector actions do you think are most urgently needed to align mining with global human rights and environmental priorities?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that the new Critical Minerals Action Plan the G7 group of nations released is an important stake in the ground that sets out commitments from some of the most powerful countries in the world and trading blocs to really drive meaningful progress in critical minerals, not just security, but supply chain resilience and development, which will benefit all of us globally. And I really appreciated the commitment to standards-based markets, which I think will respond to the kind of cries of desire by so many producers for some type of financial reward for their investments in good risk management and in driving positive impact. So the ability to generate greeniums and social premiums or create, additional sustainable finance markets and options for ESG leaders in mining, I think is really, really good. So that vision is there now, but there's a lot of infrastructure, both regulatory and institutional, to be put in place to really massage and curate and scale some of the existing tiny amounts of greeniums that exist, but also to make it possible for more. So I think that is one significant area of progress that's particularly exciting, that allows G7 nations to really also set themselves apart as market nations for driving sustainable business along minerals value chains. Also, something that I really value is cooperation. It's something that we do a lot at Levin Sources. I've written about it. We practice it in pretty much every project that we do. And so quite extensively, the action plan speaks about greater cooperation between G7 nations and their trading partners, with a range of commitments about how they will work together, including, very excitedly for me, given my role on the Gender Equality Advisory Council for the G7, a commitment to address gender-based violence in minerals value chains and to work on artisanal small-scale mining too, which is really great. But I think the difficulty we see here is that G7 nations are shrinking their overseas development assistance. So the mode through which they can generate that influence is going to have to shift unless they prioritise, a portion of the residual ODA budgets that are still there towards this. And that's something that's not. It's apparent that that's happening, but in what proportions? Is it adequate volumes? I don't know. And so I think this is why the push for greater private capital mobilisation is so emphasised in the action plan. And I think we're likely to see more blended finance solutions to unlock that critical mineral security. And then finally, the final piece of the action plan is on promoting innovation. And I personally was a bit frustrated to see that this is the only place where circularity was mentioned, because I think the mining sector can take a pretty basic and underdeveloped approach to circularity, apart from a few market leaders. And I just think there is so much that a strategic approach to circularity in how we design, operate, and close mines could really address so many human rights risks and environmental risks. We just need to see boards put that in as a key priority and change how the organisation is thinking and delivering. So that's another policy area that I think is underdeveloped, but there could be some really exciting progress.
DEI is increasingly recognised as a business and ethical imperative in mining. In your view, what are the most overlooked structural barriers preventing greater inclusion of women? And I guess how can we move from policy to real accountability?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we call ourselves an extractive sector. But my personal vision, people that know me well know that my personal vision is to help mining and minerals production and consumption evolve into some kind of post-extractivist state. Because I really think that when you have a mineral endowment, there is a need for adequate mutual benefit between the owners of that land, where it's mined, the owners of the mineral, the government, and mining companies, more as service providers, to really unlock new forms of sharing and fairer distribution of benefits and harms across stakeholders. And there's a kind of mentality shift that is needed to get us to that state. I know that the majority of people in mining would go, Estelle, what are you talking about? It's already fair, but that's because they have a particular attitude and mindset that's born of years and years with being in the sector and the way it is presently being run. And I think there's something about that mindset that contributes to the maintenance of inequality generally as being acceptable across different issues, and not, including on issues of race or gender or whatever. But separately to that, I think two of the major structural barriers to greater inclusion of marginalised groups is that, firstly, the cultures of institutions do not make people who are part of marginal groups feel psychologically safe. And if they don't feel psychologically safe, they're not going to enjoy their work. They're not going to be able to show up with 100%. They're not going to be able to take risks and put themselves forward. They're going to be contained and protecting themselves in order to just get through the day. And it's something that I engage with a lot with my other women in mining collectives I'm part of, is just how evident that is for many of these women as part of their day-to-day life, that they really don't feel like they fully belong or are fully psychologically safe in the workplace. And I think that's a real barrier, not just to proper inclusion and women's rights, but it's a barrier to growth and it's a barrier to economic returns. And I think the other major barrier is that we need more men like you, Andrew, because I know you're a passionate ambassador for these things, to understand what feminism and a more, gender equality lens can do for women and men, and how it can emancipate men too in the workplace, and unlock, better economic opportunity to everybody's benefit as well. So, we need more male allies, and I'm really pleased to see that that's bubbling up, and we're beginning to see some little male collectives who are talking about, how to decolonize themselves from patriarchy within the mining sector. And I'm quite excited to see what comes out of that in terms of the types of masculinities that can be performed within mining that can be more constructive and aligned with human rights and more aligned with sustainability, but still deliver, the kind of economic and social value that we expect to see from minerals.
You mentioned earlier on earlier on about the work you've done in artisanal and small-scale mining. How do you see artisanal and small-scale mining fitting into global critical mineral supply chains? And what would responsible integration look like under frameworks such as the G7 or the EU CRM Act?
Yeah, so it's a really great that you've asked me this question, because I think, there is so much research and understanding about precious minerals because of all the conflict minerals lenses that have been put on the ASM sector for the last 20 years, whether that was diamonds or coltan or, tin, whatever. And we are only just beginning to really unpack the contribution of ASM towards critical minerals production. So I think the first thing to say is we still don't yet fully know the extent to which ASM contributes across minerals value chains. I know that the International Copper Research Group is doing some work on copper and the ASM of copper this year. I know the World Bank is doing research on the role of ASM in critical minerals. We at Levin Sources, as part of the Africa Maval project, ran 15 country studies for the EU on the way that ASM is contributing critical minerals. And what's really clear is that it is a growing sector. Now, what responsible integration looks like, and I borrow very much from the very extensive and impactful work that the World Bank did over the last couple of years, resulting in their position paper last year on ASM, where they really problematized this commitment to formalization as the be-all and end-all, and instead explained and showed why a broader commitment to the professionalization of artisanal small-scale miners and their gradual legitimization lays the groundwork for formalization. But most importantly, because formalization is really a compliance issue, most importantly, it unlocks the sustainable development potential of artisanal small-scale mining, which it isn't a myth. It's already happening. That's why people are doing it. But you can maximize that and you can reduce the adverse risk. So I think a responsible integration of ASM into frameworks like with the G7 and the EU Critical Raw Materials Act in that light means shifting or widening the focus from it just being about formalisation as a condition of inclusion, rather instead flipping it and saying inclusion is the basis through which we can enable formalisation, and taking it in a much more gradual fashion. That may take some investments in ASM producer nations to radically alter how they regulate ASM, to really simplify it right down. So the most basic level of formality is extraordinarily simple, but a condition of remaining legal is evidence of gradual improvement and growing greater responsibility and greater professionalisation in order to maintain your formality. That would work for banks and allow for greater inclusion of ASM in formal financing. It would work for markets. So we really need to work with producer nation governments to change their laws, and to change their processes and support them with that. And that's where institutions like the World Bank or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development can really have a role, because they support with regulatory changes that enable trade.
Question I always enjoy asking some of our speakers at Resourcing Tomorrow: what is the book that's most influenced you?
Yeah, I actually I've been reading quite a lot in the last years. In my 30s, I just had my kids and was building the business, and I don't think I read very much at all. But it's been such a pleasure to get back to reading as they've got a bit older and I can get a bit more sleep. I think in recent years, the book that I keep seeming to mention in conversations is this book, Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado Perez. And it's wonderful because it explains what it is like to be a woman in a world made for men. And it explains across so many different sectors how we have engineered systems, polities, institutions, rules in ways that are oriented around the male body and the male gaze, and why that leads to an under-delivery of full potential by women. And it is such strong evidence from everything from transportation to health that while I was reading it, I knew, of course, I know as somebody that has studied feminist political ecologies and as a woman business leader, I know a bit what it means to face discrimination. But the way that she shows the extent to which it's really structured and an outcome of structural bias, and a lack of data in particular about women's experience of these different systems, it leaves you hungry for change and ready to drive that change and equipped with the knowledge you need to discuss, what are the options concretely and why that's better for everyone.
Estelle, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Look forward to meeting at Resourcing tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Can't wait to see you there, Andrew. Thank you.